Time stops for no man, not even for billionaire Maxwell Grant. For 20 years, his prized Rolex has kept perfect time, a last gift from his beloved wife before her tragic death. When the watch suddenly stops, Maxwell seeks out Thomas Reeves, a master craftsman known for his miraculous touch with timepieces. In the watchmaker's humble workshop, Maxwell's world tilts on its axis. There, behind the counter, stands a young woman with hauntingly familiar eyes he's seen only in his dreams and memories, the same unique amber-flecked green that once belonged to his wife. Could this be mere coincidence, or is there more to his wife's death than he was led to believe? What secrets has time kept hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to be revealed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maxwell Grant's penthouse, casting long shadows across Italian marble floors. From 60 stories, up Manhattan sprawled beneath him like a miniature empire, his empire in many ways. The skyline had changed over the decades, but Maxwell's morning routine had not. Coffee prepared precisely at 6:15 a.m., Wall Street Journal at 6:20. Shower at 6:45. At precisely 7:30, he slipped his vintage Rolex over his wrist, the last gift Eliza had given him before she vanished from his life. The timepiece had become more than an accessory. It was a ritual, a connection to a past that grew more distant with each passing year. "Your 8:30 with the Tokyo investors is confirmed," announced Richard, materializing at the entrance to Maxwell's private study. After 25 years as his personal assistant, Richard moved through Maxwell's life with the quiet efficiency of a ghost. The legal team sent over the acquisition papers for review before the meeting. Maxwell nodded, not looking up from his watch. Something felt different this morning. The familiar weight rested against his skin, but the gentle, rhythmic tick that had accompanied his every moment for 20 years was absent. "It stopped," Maxwell said, a hint of uncharacteristic panic edging into his voice. Richard approached, peering at the timepiece with concern. In all their years together, he'd never seen Maxwell rattled by something so trivial. But then the watch had never been trivial. "Perhaps the battery," Richard began. "It's automatic," Maxwell interrupted. "It doesn't use batteries." He rotated his wrist gently, listening for the familiar mechanical purr. Nothing. "I know someone who might help," Richard offered carefully. "Thomas Reeves. He's a watchmaker in the village, old school but the best in the city. He worked on that antique pocket watch of Eliza's, if you remember." Maxwell's jaw tightened at the mention of her name. Even after 2 decades, Richard was one of the few people who dared speak it aloud in his presence. "Have him come here," Maxwell instructed, already turning his attention to the acquisition papers. "He doesn't make house calls," Richard replied. "Not even for billionaires, I'm afraid. Quite particular about his workshop. Says the proper tools can't be transported." Maxwell looked up sharply. In his world, everything and everyone came to him. The notion of someone refusing his convenience was almost novel. "Then have a car ready," he said after a long pause. "Clear my afternoon schedule." Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly, the closest he ever came to showing surprise. Maxwell Grant hadn't ventured into that part of the city in years. Not since Eliza. "Of course," Richard replied, withdrawing discreetly. Alone again, Maxwell stared at the silent watch. For 20 years, it had never failed him. 20 years of board meetings, acquisitions, and solitary dinners in overpriced restaurants. 20 years without Eliza's laugh or the scent of her perfume when she'd brush past him in their bedroom. He ran his thumb over the sapphire crystal, remembering her words as she'd fastened it around his wrist on their last anniversary together. "Time is the only true constant, Max," she'd said, her amber-flecked green eyes dancing with that light he'd never been able to capture in the photographs he kept hidden in his desk. "It moves forward, even when we can't. The watch had kept perfect time ever since, until today." Maxwell couldn't help but feel its sudden silence was an omen. a sign that something fundamental was about to change. As he gazed out at the city he'd conquered, Maxwell felt a strange certainty that whatever waited for him in the watchmaker's shop would alter the carefully ordered world he'd built in the vacuum of Eliza's absence. When Richard left to make arrangements, Maxwell found himself drawn to his private study. He rarely spent time here anymore. The room had become more vault than sanctuary, preserving memories rather than creating new ones. Behind his mahogany desk, he pressed lightly on a wood panel. It slid open silently, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a collection of photographs he hadn't looked at in months, perhaps years. He withdrew them carefully, as if they might crumble at his touch. Eliza laughing on their sailboat in the Hamptons. Eliza in Paris, the Eiffel Tower rising behind her. Eliza asleep on their terrace, sunlight making her auburn hair glow like embers. Maxwell focused on one particular image, their last anniversary dinner. Eliza wore an emerald dress that matched her eyes, those remarkable eyes. In the photograph, she was presenting him with a small box, her expression a mixture of love and something else he hadn't recognized at the time. Sadness, perhaps, or resignation. The watch had been custom-made, a Rolex Datejust with a midnight blue dial and their initials engraved on the back. He'd been surprised by the gift. Eliza had never shown interest in status symbols. Something to remember me by, she'd said. At the time, he'd laughed at the melodrama. 6 weeks later, her car was found at the bottom of a cliff on the Pacific Coast Highway. The body was never recovered, only fragments of a blood-soaked scarf he'd identified as hers. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. "The car is ready whenever." "You are," Richard announced. "I've also taken the liberty of postponing tomorrow morning's meetings. The Tokyo deal can wait another day." Maxwell replaced the photographs and closed the compartment. "That won't be necessary," he said firmly. "I'll be back this afternoon." Richard's expression remained neutral, but Maxwell caught the skepticism in his eyes. They both knew Maxwell hadn't set foot in Greenwich Village since before Eliza's death. Their brownstone had been there, a wedding gift from Eliza's father. Maxwell had sold it within a month of the funeral. In the elevator descending to the private garage, Maxwell reflected on how thoroughly he'd buried himself in work after losing her. Grunt Enterprises had expanded tenfold in 20 years, absorbing competitors and diversifying into new markets with ruthless efficiency. The business magazines called him brilliant. His few remaining friends called him driven. The truth was, simpler. Work filled the hours. Without it, there was only the emptiness of his penthouse and memories that refused to fade. The car glided through midtown traffic, then headed downtown. Maxwell barely registered the changing architecture outside his window, the glass and steel giving way to older, more ornate facades. His mind kept returning to a recurring dream he'd had for years. In it, Eliza would be standing at the edge of a vast clock face, her back to him. When she turned, her mouth would form words he could never quite hear. "Time will reveal everything." He'd always dismissed it as his subconscious processing grief. But now, with the watch silent on his wrist, the dream took on a different dimension. Greenwich Village emerged around him, its narrow streets and historic buildings a stark contrast to the sleek modernity of his usual surroundings. The car slowed, then stopped before a narrow storefront with a simple wooden sign, "Reeves and Daughter, Horologists." Maxwell stepped onto the sidewalk, feeling strangely exposed. The neighborhood bustled with a life his sterile corporate world lacked. Students with backpacks, young parents pushing strollers, old men playing chess in the park across the street. He straightened his tie, an unconscious gesture of armor donning, and approached the shop door. An old-fashioned bell tinkled as he entered, announcing his arrival to a world he'd long ago abandoned. The interior of Reeves and Daughter was a sanctuary frozen in time. Wooden cases lined the walls, their glass fronts displaying timepieces ranging from pocket watches to ornate mantel clocks. The air smelled of wood polish and machine oil. And, everywhere, the sound of ticking, dozens of clocks marking seconds in an asynchronous chorus that Maxwell found oddly soothing. "I'll be with you in a moment," called a voice from the back of the shop. Maxwell waited, studying a particularly intricate, astronomical clock. Its face displayed not only time, but the phases of the moon and positions of planets. He wondered what Eliza would have thought of it. She'd always been fascinated by the measurement of time, not just in hours and minutes, but in seasons and cosmic cycles. "How may I help you today?" Maxwell turned to find a man in his late 60s standing behind the counter. Thomas Reeves had the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades working with precision tools, but his posture remained straight, his blue eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a wool vest over a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled into the elbow. A watchmaker's loop hung from a cord around his neck. "My watch has stopped," Maxwell said, unfastening the Rolex from his wrist. "I'm told you're the best in the city." Thomas smiled modestly. "I'm thorough, which isn't quite the same thing, may I?" Maxwell handed him the timepiece. Thomas held it reverently, turning it over in his hands before placing it on a velvet pad beneath a bright desk lamp. "A beautiful piece," he murmured, opening the back with practiced ease. "They don't make them quite like this anymore." He bent over the watch, examining its mechanism through his loop. As he did, something in his demeanor shifted subtly. A stiffening of shoulders, perhaps. The slightest tremor in those steady hands. "Is something wrong?" Maxwell asked. Thomas straightened, blinking rapidly. "No, not at all. It's just—" He cleared his throat. "I don't often see this particular model. May I ask how long you've had it?" 20 years, Maxwell replied. "It was a gift from my wife." "I see." Thomas nodded slowly. "And it's never needed service before today?" "Never. It's been perfectly reliable." Thomas seemed to be measuring his words carefully. "Well, that's quite remarkable. These mechanical movements generally require maintenance every 5 to 7 years. He turned the watch over, examining the engraving on the back. Maxwell noticed his fingers lingering over the intertwined initials. "This will require some specialized parts," Thomas said finally. "I'll need to keep it for several days, perhaps a week." "That's not possible," Maxwell responded automatically. "I need it back sooner." Thomas looked up, meeting Maxwell's gaze, directly for the first time. "Mr. Grant." Maxwell Grant. The name registered. Thomas's expression remained professional, but Maxwell caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes. Few people in New York wouldn't know the name, attached as it was to buildings, philanthropic foundations, and countless business headlines. "Mr. Grant," Thomas continued evenly, "I understand your attachment to this timepiece, but proper repair cannot be rushed. The alternative is to simply replace the movement entirely, which would solve your immediate problem, but sacrifice the originality of the piece." Before Maxwell could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Thomas glanced past him, his face softening. "Ah, perfect timing," he said. "Lily, could you help me locate the parts catalog for a mid-2000s date just?" Maxwell turned, a casual gesture that would alter the course of his carefully ordered existence. She stood in the doorway, a young woman of perhaps 19 or 20, shrugging off a light jacket. When she looked up, Maxwell felt the world tilt. Beneath his feet, her eyes, Eliza's eyes, the same remarkable shade of green with flecks of amber radiating from the pupil. Eyes he would have recognized anywhere, in any face. Eyes he had believed were gone from this world forever. Maxwell felt a physical jolt, as if someone had struck him. He gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself, aware that both Thomas and the girl, Lily, were watching him with varying degrees of concern. "Are you all right, sir?" Lily asked, moving closer. Her voice was different from Eliza's, lighter, with the cadence of someone raised in New York, rather than Eliza's subtle New England inflections. But when she tilted her head questioningly, the gesture was so achingly familiar that Maxwell had to look away. "Fine," he managed. "Just a momentary dizzy spell." Thomas was suddenly beside him, guiding him to a wooden chair near the workbench. "Please sit. Lily, would you bring Mr. Grant some water?" The girl nodded and disappeared through a doorway, giving Maxwell a precious moment to compose himself. He studied Thomas's face, searching for answers, but the watchmaker had retreated behind a mask of professional concern. "Your daughter," Maxwell said quietly. "She's what, 19? Thomas's hands stilled over the Rolex. 20 this winter. 20 years. The timing aligned perfectly with Eliza's disappearance. Lily returned with a glass of water, which Maxwell accepted gratefully. As she handed it to him, he noticed a small birthmark on her inner wrist, a crescent shape, identical to one Eliza had in the same location. "You should drink slowly," she advised. "My father says fine timepieces and human bodies have that in common. Both need proper care and patience." "Wise man, your father," Maxwell replied, studying her features more carefully. The eyes were unmistakably Eliza's, but now he saw other similarities: the slight upward tilt of her nose, the shape of her jawline. Her hair was darker than Eliza's auburn, but caught the light in the same way. Was he imagining these resemblances, projecting his memories onto a stranger's face? "Lily is my apprentice as well as my daughter," Thomas said, his tone deliberately casual. "She has a remarkable gift for the work." Lily smiled, clearly pleased by the praise. "I should get the catalogues you asked for." "Actually," Thomas interjected quickly, "would you mind running to Marco's for lunch instead? Mr. Grant and I need to discuss some details about his watch." A shadow of disappointment crossed Lily's face, but she nodded. "The usual. Please. And take your time. It's a beautiful day." Maxwell watched as she gathered her jacket and bag, noting the sketchbook that protruded from the latter. As she passed by the counter, the book slipped out, falling open on the floor. "Oh, let me," Maxwell said, reaching for it before either Thomas or Lily could react. The page displayed a pencil drawing of a lighthouse perched on rocky cliffs. Maxwell recognized it instantly, a private property on the Massachusetts coast, where he and Eliza had spent their honeymoon. "You're quite talented," he said, handing the sketchbook back. "That lighthouse, it's near Rockport, isn't it?" Lily looked surprised. "Yes, it is, though I've never been there myself. I just saw it in a photograph once and thought it was beautiful." Thomas was suddenly between them, taking the sketchbook and returning it to Lily with barely concealed urgency. "Marco's will get busy soon. You should go." When she had left, the bell above the door signaling her departure, a heavy silence descended. On the shop, Maxwell stared at Thomas, no longer bothering to hide his suspicion. "That lighthouse is on private property. It doesn't appear in travel brochures or postcards." Thomas busied himself with the watch, not meeting Maxwell's gaze. "I'm sure she saw it somewhere. Magazine, perhaps." "Mr. Reeves," Maxwell said, his voice hardening with certainty, "I think it's time you explained to me exactly how you knew my wife." Thomas's expression hardened. "I never said I knew your wife, Mr. Grant." "You didn't have to." Maxwell's voice remained steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Your reaction, when I mentioned her, told me everything I needed to know." The watchmaker sighed heavily, removing his glasses to polish them with a cloth, a gesture that seemed designed to buy time rather than clean lenses. "I met Eliza Grant once, many years ago," he finally admitted. "She brought in an antique pocket watch for repair. Your assistant mentioned it earlier, I believe. And that's all." "That's all," Thomas confirmed, though his eyes shifted away. "Now, about your Rolex." "Your daughter has my wife's eyes," Maxwell interrupted. "The exact same eyes, and a birthmark in the exact same place. And she's drawing places only Eliza would know about. Do you honestly expect me to believe these are coincidences?" Thomas replaced his glasses, his expression unreadable. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Grant?" The question hung in the air. Between them, What was he suggesting? That this watchmaker had somehow stolen his wife's genetic material? That Eliza had secretly given birth before her death? Or something even more impossible, that Eliza hadn't died at all? I don't know, Maxwell admitted, but I intend to find out. He retrieved a business card from his wallet and placed it on the counter. My private number, call me when the watch is ready. Thomas nodded stiffly, and Maxwell left, the bell chiming behind him with a finality that echoed his racing thoughts. Back in his car, Maxwell didn't immediately direct his driver to return to the penthouse. Instead, he sat in silence, staring out at the neighborhood that had once been his home. Richard, he said into his phone after several minutes, I need you to access the files on Eliza's accident. Everything, police reports, photographs, witness statements, and contact Troy Simmons. The investigator, Richard asked, his voice betraying rare surprise. May I ask why? I need him to look into someone named Thomas Reeves and his daughter, Lily. A pause. Maxwell, it's been 20 years. Do it, Richard. He ended the call and directed his driver to return to the penthouse. By the time he arrived, Richard had already assembled the requested files in his private study. Maxwell poured himself a scotch, his first before evening in years, and began to review the yellowed police report. The facts, as officially recorded, were straightforward. Eliza's car had been discovered at the bottom of a cliff on a remote stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway. No body was recovered, but blood matching her type was found on the driver's seat, and a torn scarf identified as hers was caught in the wreckage. The tide and rocky coastline, investigators theorized, had claimed her body. Maxwell remembered the hollow feeling when they'd asked him to identify the scarf. Blue silk with a pattern of small white flowers. He'd given it to her the previous Christmas. He studied the photographs now with new eyes. The car was certainly theirs, a Mercedes convertible Eliza preferred for coastal drives. The damage was extensive, consistent with a vehicle that had plunged nearly 100 feet onto rocks, but something nagged at him, a detail he'd overlooked 20 years ago when grief had clouded his judgment. The driver's side airbag had deployed, evident in the photos, yet the blood pattern on the seat seemed wrong, too deliberate almost. Setting the photos aside, Maxwell reached for his phone again. Richard, schedule a meeting with Troy Simmons. And for tomorrow morning, first thing. The emptiness in his chest had been replaced by something he hadn't felt in decades. Purpose. Troy Simmons hadn't changed much in the decade since Maxwell had last employed him. Still lean and weathered, with the watchful eyes of a man who made his living observing others, he sat across from Maxwell in the penthouse study, his tablet balanced on one knee. So you want me to investigate a watchmaker and his daughter? Troy summarized, his tone carefully neutral. Based on a resemblance to your late wife. And other discrepancies, Maxwell added, pushing the accident photos across the desk. The blood pattern never made sense. And now, a 20-year-old girl with Eliza's eyes appears in a shop owned by a man who became suspiciously uncomfortable when I mentioned my wife. Troy studied the photographs. These are pretty degraded, not much to go on after all this time. That's why I need you. Start with Thomas Reeves, where he came from, when he established his business here, when Lily entered the picture. You realize what you're implying? I'm not implying anything, Maxwell interrupted. I'm looking for facts. If it turns out I'm chasing ghosts, so be it, but I need to know. Troy nodded, tucking the photos into his case. I'll start today. But Maxwell, he hesitated, uncharacteristically cautious. Prepare yourself for disappointment. 20 years is a long time, and memory has a way of seeing what it wants to see. After Troy left, Maxwell found himself unable to focus on work. The image of Lily's eyes haunted him. Without conscious decision, he found himself directing his driver back to Greenwich Village that afternoon. Just a moment, Thomas called when the bell announced Maxwell's arrival. He emerged from the back room, freezing momentarily when he saw who had entered. Mr. Grant, I wasn't expecting you back so soon. I was in the neighborhood. Maxwell lied smoothly. I thought I'd check on the progress of my watch. Thomas's posture remained rigid. As I mentioned, it will be several days. The parts... Actually, Maxwell interrupted, I was hoping to speak with your daughter as well. She mentioned she's your apprentice. I'd be interested to hear her perspective on the craft. Before Thomas could respond, Lily appeared from the back room, her hands stained with a bluish oil. I thought I heard voices, she said, smiling politely at Maxwell. You're feeling better, I hope. Much, thank you, Maxwell replied, studying her more carefully now. In the harsh afternoon light, streaming through the shop windows, the resemblance to Eliza was even more pronounced. Your father tells me you're learning the trade. Lily nodded, her expression brightening. Since I was 12. Though Dad says, I've been taking things apart since I could hold a screwdriver. She has a natural aptitude, Thomas interjected, his tone softening when he looked at his daughter. A feel for the mechanics that can't be taught. My mother was the same, Maxwell said, watching both their reactions carefully. She could fix anything. Cars, appliances. She used to say she could hear when something wasn't working right. Lily's eyes widened with interest, but Thomas quickly stepped between them. Lily, those dials you were refinishing need another coat before they set. But that's not for ours. Please, Thomas said firmly, when she had reluctantly returned to the back room. Thomas turned to Maxwell, his earlier pretense of politeness gone. Mr. Grant, I understand you're curious about my daughter, but I must insist you respect our privacy. When did you move to New York, Mr. Reeves? Maxwell asked abruptly. Thomas blinked. Excuse me? It's a simple question. When did you establish your shop here? 20 years ago, Thomas answered, then immediately looked as if he regretted the admission. Not that it's relevant to your watch repair. And Lily? Was she with you then? Thomas's jaw tightened. She was an infant. Mr. Grant, I don't know what you're implying, but did you work for Ashton Industries before becoming a watchmaker? Maxwell pressed, recalling Eliza's maiden name. The color drained from Thomas's face. How did you... Thank you, Maxwell said quietly. That's all I needed to know. The storage facility on the outskirts of Manhattan had been maintained for 2 decades, its annual fees automatically deducted from one of Maxwell's accounts. Richard had offered to empty it years ago. Part of moving on, he'd suggested gently. But Maxwell had refused. Now, as the facility manager unlocked the climate-controlled unit, Maxwell felt a strange apprehension. He hadn't visited in over 15 years. Take your time, Mr. Grant, the manager said, stepping aside. Call my office when you're finished. The space was smaller than Maxwell remembered, perhaps 20 feet square, filled with carefully labeled boxes. Eliza's life, or at least her. Possessions catalogued and preserved like museum artifacts. He moved methodically through the containers, scanning labels until he found what he was looking for. Personal papers. Study. Inside were folders of financial documents, correspondence, and 3 leather-bound journals. Maxwell recognized them immediately. Eliza had written in her journal almost daily, a habit from childhood she'd maintained into adulthood. He'd never read them, had considered it an invasion of her privacy even after her death. Now, he carefully opened the most recent volume, dated the year of her disappearance. The early entries were mundane, appointments, observations about her charity work, occasional frustrations with household staff, but as he progressed through the months leading to her vanishing, a darker thread emerged. March 12th. Max didn't come. Home again. 3rd time this week. The Peterson development is consuming him. When I mentioned the environmental impact report, he dismissed it as tree-hugger hysteria. We haven't really talked in weeks. April 3rd, dinner with the Jacobsons was unbearable. Max spent the entire evening discussing acquisition targets with Stuart, completely ignoring Ellen's attempts to engage him about the Children's Hospital fundraiser. I barely recognize him anymore. April 17th. The doctor confirmed it today. I'm pregnant, 8 weeks along. I should be overjoyed, but all I feel is panic. What kind of father will Max be now? He's become so cold, so focused on empire building. This isn't the man I married. Maxwell's hands trembled as he read the words. Pregnant. Eliza had been pregnant when she disappeared. He forced himself to continue reading. May 2nd. I spoke with Thomas today. He's agreed to help me. It's drastic, but I see no alternative. Max has changed too much. The money, the power. It's transformed him into someone I don't know anymore. I can't raise a child in this environment, watching their father become more distant and ruthless by the day. May 10th. The arrangements are in place. Thomas has found a location where we can establish new lives. I've transferred funds through the channels he suggested, untraceable. The accident scene will be convincing enough. By the time this is discovered, we'll be gone. May 15th. Last night may have been my final evening with Max. We attended the charity gala, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the man I fell in love with. He actually looked at me, really looked, for the first time in months. I almost wavered in my resolve. But then Henderson approached with news about the Seattle acquisition, and Max was gone again, pulled back into his world of deals and conquests. I touched my stomach, felt the slight swell there, and knew I was making the right choice for our child. The final entry was dated 3 days before the accident. May 20th. Everything is prepared. Thomas will meet me at the designated point. The car, the scarf, the blood, all arranged. I leave this journal behind, knowing Max will never read it. His respect for my privacy has always been absolute. Perhaps that's ironic, considering how little he respects my concerns about his business practices. I hope someday he'll understand why I had to leave. I hope someday he'll be ready to know his child. Until then, we must remain ghosts. Maxwell closed the journal, his world crashing down around him. All these years he had mourned a woman who hadn't died, who had chosen to leave him, who had taken his child, a child he never knew existed. Troy. Simmons arrived at Maxwell's penthouse the following morning with a folder of documents and a troubled expression. "You're not going to like what I found," he said without preamble. Maxwell, who hadn't slept, merely nodded. "Show me." Troy spread several papers across the desk. Thomas Reeves worked as a master watchmaker for Ashton Industries from 1985 to 2003, maintaining their precision manufacturing equipment. He was well respected, but suddenly resigned and disappeared from their records. Eliza's father's company, Maxwell confirmed. Yes, and there's more. Troy placed a financial document on top. After considerable digging, I discovered a trust fund established by Eliza Grant approximately 3 weeks before her disappearance. The beneficiary is listed as TR Guardian Services, a shell company whose sole director is Thomas Reeves. Maxwell examined the document, and the funds? Regular distributions, paid quarterly for the past 20 years. Always the same amount, enough to support a comfortable but not extravagant lifestyle for 2 people. The evidence aligned perfectly with Eliza's journal entries. Maxwell should have felt vindicated by the confirmation, but instead he felt hollow. "There's something else," Troy continued, placing a final document before Maxwell. "Lily Reeves's birth certificate. She was born exactly 7 months after Eliza Grant's disappearance." Maxwell stared at the certificate. Mother, Jane Reeves. Father, Thomas Reeves. A fiction, carefully constructed to hide the truth. "Thank you, Troy," he said quietly. "That will be all for now." After the investigator left, Maxwell summoned Richard, who listened in stunned silence as Maxwell revealed what he had discovered. "You knew," Maxwell said finally. "It wasn't a question." Richard's face paled. "What?" "Eliza consulted you about financial matters. The trust fund couldn't have been established without your knowledge." Richard sat heavily in the chair across from Maxwell. "She came to me about setting up an independent account," he admitted. "She said she needed financial autonomy, that your controlling tendencies were suffocating her. And you didn't think to tell me this? She swore me to secrecy. And frankly, Maxwell, she wasn't wrong. Richard met his gaze directly. You were becoming obsessed with expansion, with power. The man I'd worked for all those years was disappearing. Eliza noticed it first, but we all did. Maxwell thought back. To that time, the endless meetings, the aggressive acquisitions, the ruthless tactics he'd employed to absorb competitors. He'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd failed to notice his marriage crumbling. Did you know she was pregnant? He asked. Richard shook his head. No. And I certainly didn't know she planned to disappear. I would have told you that. Maxwell relieved him. Richard had always been loyal, even when that loyalty meant telling uncomfortable truths. What will you do now? Richard asked cautiously. It was the question Maxwell had wrestled with all night. He had the power to upend lives, to expose Eliza's deception, to claim his parental rights to Lily, to punish Thomas for his role in the charade. His lawyers would salivate at the prospect of such a case. But what would that accomplish? 20 years had passed. Lily had grown up believing Thomas was her father. What right did he have to shatter her world? And yet, wasn't that exactly what Eliza had done to him? I'm going to confront Thomas, Maxwell said finally, with evidence this time, not just suspicions. And then, I don't know yet, but I want answers. From him and eventually from Eliza. Richard's eyebrows rose. You believe she's still alive? Maxwell nodded. The trust fund is still active. Wherever she is, she's ensuring her daughter is provided for. Her daughter? Richard repeated carefully. Your daughter? Yes, Maxwell said, the word strange on his tongue. My daughter. The workshop was closed when Maxwell arrived that evening, but a light shone from the back room. He knocked firmly on the door, the folder of evidence tucked under his arm. After a long moment, Thomas appeared, his expression hardening when he saw Maxwell. We're closed. We need to talk, Maxwell said, about Eliza, about Lily. Thomas hesitated, then unlocked the door. Lily isn't here. Good. This conversation should happen between us first. The workshop felt different in the evening. Light, more intimate, the ticking of dozens of clocks creating a cocoon of sound. Thomas led Maxwell to the back room, a space half workshop, half living area, with a small kitchenette and worn but comfortable furniture. Would you like some tea? Thomas asked, his hospitality clearly automatic rather than genuine. No. Maxwell placed the folder on the workbench. I know everything, Thomas. I found Eliza's journals. I know about the trust fund. I know that Lily was born 7 months after Eliza's death. I know she's my daughter. Thomas sank onto a stool, the fight visibly draining from him. How did you find out? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been lying to me for 20 years. You helped my wife fake her death. You've raised my child as your own. Thomas reached for a small brass key hanging from a hook on the wall. I always knew this day might come, he said quietly. I just hoped it wouldn't be until Lily was older. He used the key to unlock a drawer in the workbench, removing a worn leather portfolio. Before you judge me, before you decide what happens next, you should understand why we did what we did. Maxwell accepted the portfolio. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to my dearest Lily and signed your mother. The handwriting was unmistakably Eliza's. She writes to Lily? Maxwell asked, throat tightening. Thomas nodded. Every month for 20 years. I've saved them all. When Lily was old enough, I began sharing them with her, carefully edited to maintain our story that her mother died when she was an infant. So Lily doesn't know the truth about her mother? About me? No. Eliza wanted to protect her from the complications of her choice. Thomas rubbed his eyes wearily. You have to understand something, Mr. Grant. Eliza was desperate when she came to me. She believed you had become someone who would see a child as an heir rather than a person to be loved. That wasn't her decision to make, Maxwell said, anger flaring. Perhaps not, but she made it, and I helped her because I believed she was. Right, Thomas met Maxwell's gaze directly. I watched what happened to my oldest friend, Ashton, when wealth became his primary concern. I saw how it affected his relationship with Eliza, and then I watched the same transformation happen to you. So you appointed yourself judge and decided I was unworthy of knowing my own child. I carried out Eliza's wishes, Thomas corrected, and I raised Lily with love and stability. Can you honestly say she would have had the same with you back then? The question hit Maxwell like a physical blow. He thought of his life 20 years ago, the 16-hour workdays, the ruthless corporate maneuvers, the emotional detachment that had allowed him to crush competitors without remorse. Would he have made time for a child? Would he have been capable of putting someone else's needs before his ambition? That still doesn't justify what you did, Maxwell said, but his tone had lost some of its edge. No, Thomas agreed. It doesn't, but it explains it. He hesitated, then pushed a small key across the workbench. This opens the cabinet in my bedroom. Inside is everything, all of Eliza's letters, photographs, records of our communication. Before you decide what happens next, review them, understand the full story. Maxwell picked up the key, turning it over in his fingers. And if I decide to tell Lily everything, Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Then I ask only that we do it carefully. She deserves that much. Maxwell didn't return to his penthouse that night. Instead, he checked into a boutique hotel in the village, unwilling to face Richard's concerned gaze or the sterile emptiness of his home. He needed neutral ground to process what he had discovered. The box of letters sat on the hotel desk, an archive of the life he'd been denied. With trembling hands, he opened the first one, dated 3 months after Eliza's disappearance. My dearest Lily, today you smiled for the first time. A real smile, not the reflexive ones the books describe. I was singing to you that old lullaby my mother used to sing to me, and suddenly your entire face lit up. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I made the right choice for us. Thomas says you're growing faster than most babies your age. He's become surprisingly adept at childcare for a man who spent his life working with tiny gears and springs. But perhaps that's not so surprising. Both require patience and delicate hands. Sometimes I wonder what your father would think of you. You have his determination already. The way you furrow your brow when you're concentrating reminds me so much of him. There was a time when that expression meant he was working on something that would make the world better. I hope someday that's true again. All my love, your mother Maxwell. Read until dawn, working chronologically through the letters. They formed a shadow history of his daughter's life. First steps, first words, favorite books, childhood illnesses, school accomplishments. Eliza had documented everything with a mother's attentive eye, her love evident in every carefully chosen word. But woven through the narratives were pointed references to Maxwell that revealed Eliza's complex feelings. About her decision, I saw your father on television today. Grant Enterprises has become one of the largest corporations in the country. He looked thin, tired. Success has always come at a cost for him. I remember telling him once that he would work himself into an early grave. He laughed and said there would be time for rest later. I wonder if he still believes that. Another letter written when Lily was 7. You asked Thomas about your real parents today. He called me, unsure what to say. We agreed on a partial truth, that your birth mother loved you very much but couldn't care for you, that she entrusted you to Thomas because she knew he would be a wonderful father. You seemed satisfied with this explanation, but I know the questions will become more complex as you grow older. How do I explain that I chose to leave your father not because he was a bad man, but because he was becoming one? How do I explain that I feared what his world would do to you? The expectations, the pressure, the privilege without purpose. The most recent letter dated just 6 months ago. My brilliant girl, on the cusp of adulthood. Thomas tells me you've inherited my social conscience and your father's determination. A powerful combination. Your work with the Community Garden Project makes me prouder than you can imagine. I've been thinking lately about choices and consequences. 20 years ago, I made a decision that changed 3 lives forever. I've never doubted it was the right choice for you. You've grown into a compassionate, grounded young woman, free from the distorting influence of extreme wealth and the expectations that would have been placed on you as a Grant heir. But I've begun to wonder if it was fair to your father. He deserved to know you, to see the remarkable person you've become. Perhaps I underestimated his capacity for change. Perhaps, given the chance, he would have been the father you deserved. I find myself watching the business news sometimes, looking for glimpses of him. His hair has gone grey at the temples. His companies now include substantial philanthropic divisions. Maybe he found his way back to the man I fell in love with after all. With all my love, always, your mother. Maxwell set the final letter down, overwhelmed by grief for the 20 years of fatherhood he had lost, and by the haunting question of whether Eliza had been right to take that from him. Maxwell returned to the watchmaker's shop the following morning, the letters carefully repacked in their box. Thomas was at the workbench, examining Maxwell's Rolex under a bright lamp. "I fixed it," Thomas said without looking up. The issue was with the mainspring, unusual for this model, but not unprecedented. Maxwell set the box of letters on the bench. "Thank you for sharing these with me." Thomas nodded, finally meeting Maxwell's gaze. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Before Maxwell could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Lily entered, unwinding a scarf from around her neck. "Morning, Dad," she called, then stopped, short at the sight of Maxwell. "Oh, Mr. Grant, you're here early. Your father has finished repairing my watch," Maxwell said, his voice surprisingly steady, considering he was speaking to the daughter he'd never known. "Lily," Thomas said carefully, "would you mind going to Marcello's for coffee? Mr. Grant and I have a few more details to discuss." She looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Sure, but I can make coffee here if you'd prefer." "Marcello's would be better," Thomas insisted gently. When she had gone, Maxwell settled onto a stool across from Thomas. "I need to know her, not just through Eliza's letters, but as a person. And how do you propose to do that without telling her who you are? For now, I could be a client who takes an interest in her apprenticeship, a mentor perhaps." Maxwell paused. "I have no intention of disrupting her life, Thomas, but she's my daughter. I've lost 20 years. I don't want to lose any more." Thomas removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "And what happens when she starts asking questions? Lily is perceptive. She'll notice your interest in her goes beyond normal mentorship. Then we'll tell her the truth, together, when the time is right." "Just like that? You expect me to help you after everything?" "No," Maxwell admitted. "I expect you to help her. This isn't about what you or I deserve. It's about what's best for Lily." Thomas was silent for a long moment, absently polishing the crystal of Maxwell's watch. "There's something else you should know," he finally said. "Something not in the letters." Maxwell tensed. "What?" "2 weeks ago, I received an email from Eliza, the first direct communication in almost a year." Thomas hesitated. "She's ill, Maxwell. Cancer. Late stage." The revelation hit Maxwell like a physical blow. Despite everything, the thought of Eliza, suffering, perhaps dying, was unbearable. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Switzerland, a small village in the Alps. She's been living there under another name for the past 15 years. Thomas handed Maxwell a folded paper with an address. "She doesn't know I'm giving you this. She specifically asked me not to tell Lily about her condition." "She still doesn't want me to know my daughter," Maxwell realized, anger mingling with his shock. "It's not that simple," Thomas countered. "She's trying to spare Lily the pain of finding her mother only to lose her again." Maxwell pocketed the address, mind racing. "I need proof," he said abruptly, "that Lily is mine." Thomas looked startled. "The letters aren't enough? I need scientific confirmation before I make any decisions." Thomas studied him suspiciously. "You're not planning to use that in some legal maneuver, are you?" "Because I promise you—" "No," Maxwell interrupted. This is for me. I need to be certain. Fine. But how do you propose to get a DNA sample without Lily's knowledge? Maxwell's gaze fell on the coffee cup Lily had left on the counter from the previous day. I believe that would work. Thomas followed his gaze and sighed. Very well. But Maxwell, regardless of what that test shows, remember that being a father is about more than biology. I've raised that girl for 20 years. I've bandaged her knees, helped with her homework, sat up with her when she was sick. That counts. For something? Yes, Maxwell agreed quietly. It counts for everything. 3 days later, Maxwell sat in his penthouse study, staring at the DNA test results displayed on his tablet. The clinical language confirmed what he'd already known in his heart. Lily was unquestionably his biological daughter. The certainty should have brought relief, but instead, it intensified the weight of all he had missed. A knock interrupted his. In thoughts, Troy Simmons entered, carrying a slim folder. "I have the information you requested on Eliza's whereabouts," Troy said, placing the folder on the desk. "It wasn't easy to track her. She's been careful." Maxwell opened the folder to find several surveillance photographs. The woman in them was still recognizably Eliza, though her auburn hair was now streaked with silver and styled shorter than she'd worn it during their marriage. She was thinner, her posture slightly stooped as she walked along a cobblestone street, or sat at an outdoor cafe. "She goes by the name Elena Rousseau now," Troy explained. "Lives in a small village called Meiringen in the Swiss Alps. She's established herself as an environmental consultant, working primarily with sustainable development organizations." Maxwell studied the most recent photograph, taken just a week ago. Despite the changes, her eyes remained the same, that unique green with amber flecks that she had passed to their daughter. "There's more," Troy continued, his tone shifting. "Medical records were harder to access, but I managed to obtain some information through local contacts." He hesitated. "She's been undergoing treatment for stage 4 pancreatic cancer at a clinic in Geneva. The prognosis is not good. Months. At best." Maxwell closed the folder, a storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. For 20 years, he had mourned Eliza, then resented her, then mourned her again in a different way. Now, faced with the reality of her imminent death, he found himself unable to name what he felt. "There's one other thing," Troy added, producing a final photograph. This was taken 2 months ago in Zurich. The image showed Eliza seated at a restaurant table with a younger woman. It took Maxwell a moment to recognize Lily, her hair pulled back, laughing at something Eliza had said. "They've met?" Maxwell asked, his voice barely audible. "According to my sources, regularly over the past 3 years, always in different European cities, never in the United States." The revelation struck Maxwell like a physical blow. Thomas had lied again. Lily knew her mother was alive. How much else did she know? "Thank you, Troy," Maxwell said, regaining his composure. "That will be all." After the investigator left, Maxwell summoned Richard. "Book the jet," he instructed. "I'm going to Switzerland." Richard, who had been briefed on the developing situation, nodded without surprise. "When would you like to leave?" "Tomorrow, and Richard, don't inform Thomas Reeves of my plans." Later that evening, as Maxwell was packing, his phone rang. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. "She knows," Thomas said without preamble, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Lily knows everything." Maxwell sat heavily on the edge of his bed. "How? Your investigator wasn't as discreet as you might have hoped. Someone at the lab mentioned the paternity test to her when she came in to pick up some repair supplies. She confronted me and I—" Thomas's voice broke. "I couldn't lie to her anymore. Is she all right?" A bitter laugh. "No, Maxwell, she's not all right. She just found out her entire life is built on lies, that her mother isn't dead, that her father isn't her father. How would you be? I need to speak with her." "She doesn't want to talk to you," Thomas replied, flatly. "And frankly, I don't blame her." "Then I'll talk to Eliza," Maxwell decided. I know she's in Switzerland. I know Lily has been meeting with her. Silence stretched across the line. How did you... Thomas began, then stopped. Of course, your investigator again. Why didn't you tell me they were in contact? Because Eliza asked me not to. Because it wasn't your business. My daughter is my business, Maxwell countered, anger flaring. Your daughter? Thomas's voice was cold now. You may have contributed DNA, Maxwell, but you haven't earned the right to call her. That yet. The Swiss village of Meiringen nestled in a valley surrounded by dramatic alpine peaks. As Maxwell's hired car wound through the narrow roads, he was struck by how different this place was from the world he inhabited. Quaint, timeless, existing. At a human scale, his Manhattan life had long ago abandoned. That's it, the driver said, pointing to a stone cottage set slightly apart from the others, surrounded by a garden that somehow remained vibrant despite the autumn chill. Rousseau residence. Maxwell thanked him and asked him to wait. The gravel, but to the front door, seemed impossibly long. Each step weighted with 2 decades of unspoken words. Before he could knock, the door opened. Eliza stood there, thinner than in the surveillance photos, a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the day. Her eyes, those distinctive eyes she'd passed to their daughter, widened in shock. Maxwell, she whispered, her hand gripping the doorframe for support. Hello, Eliza. His prepared speech dissolved in the reality of her presence. She stepped back, a wordless invitation to enter. The interior of the cottage was everything her Manhattan life with him had not been. Modest, warm, filled with books and handcrafted items. Plants thrived on every windowsill. A half-finished watercolor sat on an easel by the largest window, capturing the mountain view. Thomas called, she said finally, gesturing for him to sit at a small wooden table. He told me you discovered everything that Lily knows. Maxwell remained standing. Were you ever going to tell me? Eliza sank into a chair, suddenly looking every bit as ill as her diagnosis suggested. I asked myself that question every year on her birthday. And I never had an answer. She met his gaze directly, the familiar determination still evident despite her frailty. The longer it went on, the harder it became to imagine a way to tell you that wouldn't destroy everything Lily knew about herself. So instead, you let her believe a lie. You robbed me of my daughter's entire childhood. Yes, Eliza admitted softly, I did that. I won't insult you by saying I'm sorry, because while I regret your pain, I still believe I made the right choice for her. Maxwell finally sat, the anger he'd nursed for days giving way to something more complex. Why, Eliza? What was so terrible about the life I could have given her? It wasn't about money or privilege, Maxwell. It was about who you were becoming. She poured water from a pitcher with hands that trembled slightly. The man I married wanted to create something meaningful, but somewhere along the way, creation became acquisition. Growth became domination. You stopped seeing people as people. They became assets or obstacles. I was building a legacy, Maxwell defended. For whom? Eliza challenged. You never spoke of children. When I tried to discuss starting a family, you always deferred after the next deal, when the time is right. But the right time never came, because there was always another company to acquire, another competitor to crush. The truth of her words stung. Maxwell remembered those conversations now, how he'd brushed aside her gentle suggestions about family, too focused on his next corporate conquest. When I discovered I was pregnant, Eliza continued, I watched you carefully for weeks, trying to imagine you as a father. All I could see was a man who would view his child as an extension of himself, an heir to groom, not a person to nurture. You didn't give me the chance to prove you wrong. No, she agreed. I didn't. Perhaps that was unfair. A silence fell between them, filled with 20 years of divergent lives. You're ill, Maxwell said finally, the anger in his voice giving way to concern. Eliza's smile was sad. Yes, Not long now, according to the doctors. And Lily knows this. 2. She knows I'm sick, not how sick. Eliza's gaze drifted to the window, to the mountains beyond. I didn't want her last memories of me to be defined by illness, yet you allowed her to meet you, to know you were alive. 3 years ago she found a letter I'd written to Thomas. She came to Switzerland on her own and confronted me. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't turn her away, Maxwell. I couldn't lose her twice. Back in New York, 3 days later, Maxwell found himself drawn to the watchmaker's shop. His Rolex, now repaired, kept perfect time again, ticking steadily on his wrist as a reminder that life continued its measured pace regardless of personal upheaval. He hadn't intended to return so soon after his confrontation with Eliza, but something compelled him. Perhaps it was the need to complete the circuit, to connect the disparate pieces of this fractured story. The shop was open, the familiar bell announcing his arrival. Thomas looked up from the workbench, his expression guarded. "You're back," he observed flatly. "I saw Eliza," Maxwell replied. Thomas nodded, setting aside the delicate mechanism he'd been adjusting. "She told me. She also said you were unexpectedly understanding." "Understanding isn't the word I'd choose," Maxwell said, "but seeing her condition, it changes perspectives." "Yes," Thomas agreed softly. "It does." Maxwell glanced around the shop. "Is Lily here?" "No, she hasn't come to the shop since—" Thomas trailed off, gesturing vaguely. "Since she learned the truth. She's staying with a friend. Needs time to process everything." Maxwell understood that feeling all too well. "I'd like to speak with her when she's ready." "That's not my decision to make anymore," Thomas replied, an edge of bitterness in his voice. "For 20 years, I've tried to protect her. Now she knows I've been lying to her all that time. My credibility as a father is somewhat compromised at the moment." There was a raw vulnerability in Thomas that Maxwell hadn't seen before. The pain of a parent who had lost their child's trust. "You did what you thought was right," Maxwell said, surprising himself with the sentiment. Thomas looked up sharply. "Is that what Eliza told you?" "It's what I've come to understand on my own." Maxwell removed his Rolex, placing it on the counter between them. "You fixed it?" "Yes. The mechanism was fine, just needed proper calibration." Thomas picked up the watch, turning it over in his hands. "Do you know why mechanical watches stop working?" Maxwell shook his head. "Most often it's because the oils that lubricate the movement have dried up or degraded. Tiny particles of dust get in, creating friction. The parts that should glide against each other begin to catch and grab. Eventually the whole mechanism." He seizes. He handed the watch back to Maxwell. "Sometimes what looks like a broken thing is just something that needs proper care, attention to the small details that keep it running smoothly." Before Maxwell could respond, the shop door opened. Lily stood there, her face pale but composed, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad, She stopped when she saw Maxwell. "Oh, I didn't know you had a customer." "Not a customer," Thomas said gently. "Mr. Grant was just returning to check on his watch." Lily's gaze fell on the Rolex in Maxwell's hand, then lifted to his face. The directness of her stare, so like Eliza's, caught him off guard. "The watch that brought you into our lives," she said quietly. Maxwell nodded, unable to form words adequate to the moment. "Lily," Thomas began cautiously, "Mr. Grant has been to Switzerland. He's seen your mother." "I know," she replied, surprising both men. "She called me last night." An awkward silence fell over the shop, broken only by the synchronized ticking of dozens of clocks. "I should go," Maxwell said finally, moving toward the door. "Wait." Lily's voice stopped him. "I have questions. For both of you." She looked between Maxwell and Thomas. "I've spent the last week trying to understand how the two people I should have been able to trust most in this world could have lied to me for my entire life." Thomas flinched visibly at her words. "And I've realized," she continued, "that I can't make sense of any of this until I hear the whole story. Not just pieces, not just one perspective." She fixed her gaze on Maxwell. "Including yours." "I'll tell you anything you want to know," Maxwell promised. "Not here," Lily decided. "Somewhere neutral. The three of us. You, me, and—" she hesitated, glancing at Thomas. "And my dad." The word seemed to release some of the tension from Thomas's shoulders. "Tomorrow," Lily said. "Noon, the cafe across from Washington Square." Maxwell nodded, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "I'll be there." The cafe buzzed with midday activity. Students with laptops, business people on lunch breaks, tourists studying maps of the city. Maxwell arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table in the corner that offered some privacy. For the first time in years, he'd dressed down. No bespoke suit, just slacks and a cashmere sweater. An attempt, perhaps, to appear more approachable to the daughter who knew him only as a billionaire stranger. Thomas and Lily arrived precisely at noon. She looked different today, more composed, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing jeans and a simple blouse. The casual elegance reminded Maxwell so much of Eliza that his chest tightened. "Thank you for coming," Maxwell said as they sat. Lily nodded, placing a manila envelope on the table between them. "I brought something I think we should discuss." She opened the envelope and removed a document, her birth certificate. The official record that listed Thomas Reeves as her father and Jane Reeves as her mother. "A completely fabricated document," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "Every time I've used this, for school registration, for my passport, for my driver's license, I've been perpetuating a lie without knowing it." Thomas reached for her hand, but she pulled away slightly. "I understand why you're angry," he began. "Do you?" Lily challenged. "Because I'm not sure I do. I've spent days trying to understand how the people who claim to love me could build my entire life on a foundation of lies. We were protecting you," Thomas said softly. "From what?" Lily's composure cracked slightly. "From knowing who I really am. From my actual father." Maxwell winced at the edge in her voice when she referred to him. "Your mother believed," Thomas started. "My mother?" Lily interrupted. "Who I thought was dead until 3 years ago, who made me promise not to tell you that I knew she was alive. More secrets, more lies." She turned to Maxwell, her gaze direct and challenging. "And you? Did you ever look for her, for us, after the accident?" Maxwell met her eyes, refusing to look away from her pain. "Not the way I should have. The police investigation concluded fairly quickly. The evidence seemed clear. But you were one of the richest men in New York," Lily pressed. "You could have hired investigators, offered rewards. If you'd truly loved her, wouldn't you have turned over every stone to find her?" The question struck Maxwell like a physical blow. It was the same one he had been asking himself since discovering the truth. "I thought I'd identified her scarf in the wreckage," he said quietly. "I thought I'd lost her. But you're right. I accepted the official conclusion too easily. Perhaps because deep down, I knew our marriage had been failing. Perhaps because burying myself in work was easier than confronting that failure." Lily seemed surprised by his candor. She glanced at Thomas, then back to Maxwell. "My mother's letters always described you as brilliant but cold, driven but distant." Her words were measured, testing. "Is that who you are?" "It's who I was," Maxwell admitted. "Whether I've changed enough to deserve a second chance is not for me to judge." Thomas, who had been silently watching the exchange, finally spoke. "Lily, I know you feel betrayed. You have every right to. But please understand, your mother and I truly believed we were doing what was best for you. By denying me my identity?" Lily asked. "By letting me believe I was someone I'm not?" "You are exactly who you've always been," Thomas insisted. "Your DNA doesn't change the person you've become, doesn't it?" Lily withdrew another document from the envelope, a DNA test result. "Because according to this, half of who I am comes from a man I've never known." She turned to Maxwell. "Mother is Dying. Did she tell you that? Maxwell nodded, throat tight. She wants to see us both before... Lily couldn't finish the sentence. She wants us to come to Switzerland, together. The request hung in the air between them. I don't know if I can forgive any of you yet, Lily continued, her voice wavering. For the first time. But I do know that if we don't do this now, we'll never have another chance. The decision to travel to Switzerland wasn't made that day in the cafe, nor in the days that followed. Lily needed time to process, to grieve for the life she thought she'd had, to come to terms with the reality of who she was. Maxwell respected her need for space, though every day that passed was a day Eliza might not have left. A week later, his phone rang late in the evening. I'll go, Lily said without preamble, but I have conditions. Name them, Maxwell replied. Thomas comes with us. Whatever happens, he's still my father in every way that matters. Of course. And I need to know everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. Before we leave, you tell me about your life with my mother. The real story. Yes, Maxwell agreed. You deserve that much. 3 days later, they boarded Maxwell's private jet, an arrangement that clearly made both Thomas and Lily uncomfortable, but was necessary given Eliza's deteriorating condition. As the plane crossed the Atlantic, Maxwell honored his promise, sharing the story of his relationship with Eliza from their first meeting to their final days together. He spoke of their early years, her passion for environmental causes, his drive to build something lasting. He acknowledged how his ambition had gradually consumed him, transforming their relationship in ways he'd been too blind to see. He admitted that Eliza had been right about the man he was becoming, though it had taken her absence to make him recognize it. Lily listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed her mother's influence, sharp, insightful observations that cut to the heart of matters. Thomas remained largely silent, his presence a reminder of the complex bonds that had brought them to this moment. They landed in Zurich the following morning, continuing to Meiringen by private car. Snow had fallen overnight, transforming the alpine landscape into a pristine white canvas. As they approached Eliza's cottage, smoke curled from the chimney against the crystalline blue sky. "It's beautiful here," Lily said softly. "Peaceful. Your mother always loved the mountains," Maxwell replied. "Even when we lived in the city, she would find excuses to escape to higher elevations." Thomas cleared his throat. "She's expecting. You both. I'll wait at the hotel." "No," Lily said firmly, taking his hand. "You're part of this, all of it." The path to the cottage door seemed both endless and too short. Eliza opened it before they could knock, as if she'd been watching for their arrival. She looked frailer than when Maxwell had seen her just weeks earlier, but her eyes brightened at the sight of Lily. "You came," she whispered, embracing her daughter. "All of you." The interior of the cottage was warm, a fire crackling in the stone hearth. They settled in the small living room, Eliza in an armchair, wrapped in blankets despite the heat. Lily perched on the ottoman beside her, Maxwell and Thomas on the sofa across from them. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of 20 years of secrets and separation hung in the air between them. "I owe you all an apology," Eliza finally said, her voice thin but determined. "Especially you, Lily. I thought I was protecting you, but in trying to shield you. From one pain, I created another. Why didn't you tell me the truth when I found you 3 years ago?" Lily asked, the hurt still evident in her voice. "Cowardice," Eliza admitted. "By then, the lie had grown so large, I couldn't see a way to dismantle it without destroying everything." She reached for her daughter's hand. "I was wrong." She turned to Maxwell. "And you, I took your child from you. Whatever my reasons, you deserved better. We can't change the past," Maxwell said quietly. "No," Eliza agreed. "But perhaps we can salvage something from it." She looked at Thomas, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, before addressing Lily again. "You have 2 fathers in different ways. Both love you, both want what's best for you. "And a mother who's leaving again," Lily said, tears filling her eyes. "Not by choice this time," Eliza whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "But I'm here now. We all are, together at last." 3 months later, Maxwell stood beside Lily at a small cemetery overlooking the valley. The alpine winter had given way to early spring, a dusting of wildflowers emerging through patches of lingering snow. Before them, a simple headstone bore the name Eliza Grant, her true name, reclaimed in her final days. Thomas hung back slightly, giving them space while remaining present. The three had spent those precious final weeks with Eliza in a strange, makeshift family unit, sharing meals, stories, and the quiet hours of watching as she slipped away from them. She had died peacefully in her sleep, Lily holding one hand, Maxwell the other. "She loved it here," Lily said, placing fresh flowers on the grave. "I understand why she chose it," Maxwell nodded. In their final private conversation, Eliza had asked his forgiveness, not for leaving him, which she still believed had been necessary, but for how she'd left, for the cruelty of letting him believe she was dead. "You're going back to New York today?" Lily asked, though she knew the answer. "Yes. The business has survived without me, but Richard is threatening mutiny if I extend my absence any longer." He smiled slightly. "And you?" "I'll stay another week to finalize the cottage sale, then back to the city." She glanced at Thomas. "Back to the shop." The relationship between father and daughter remained complicated, wounded by deception but too deeply rooted to sever. In watching them together during these difficult weeks, Maxwell had seen the true depth of Thomas's love for Lily and her love for him, despite everything. "You're welcome at the penthouse any time," Maxwell said. "No pressure, just an open invitation." Lily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'd like that. Maybe next week after we're back? Dinner?" "I'd like that very much." They walked back to the small inn where they'd been staying. Thomas joined them for a final lunch before Maxwell's departure. The conversation flowed more easily now, the sharp edges of betrayal having softened, if not disappeared entirely. "The workshop has been neglected," Thomas mused. "I suspect there's a backlog of repairs waiting for us, including that antique regulator clock from the Morgensterns," Lily added. "I was halfway through replacing the escapement when—" She trailed off, the timeline of their lives now permanently divided into before and after. "You'll finish it," Thomas assured her. "You have a gift for the work." "From both sides, apparently," she said, glancing at Maxwell. "Mother told me you used to take apart watches as a child." Maxwell smiled, surprised that Eliza had remembered this detail from their early conversations. "My father thought it was a waste of time. He wanted me focused on the family business." "Like mother, like daughter," Thomas said quietly. "Eliza would disassemble anything mechanical she could get her hands on. It's how we first connected, when she worked in her father's factory. She was always bringing me broken devices to examine." These small revelations, threads connecting Lily to both her biological parents, had become precious to Maxwell. Each one helped complete the picture of his daughter, of the legacy that ran through her veins. After lunch, as Maxwell prepared to leave for the airport, Lily approached him privately. "Your watch," she said, gesturing to his wrist, where the Rolex once again kept perfect time. "It stopped on purpose, you know." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Watches don't have intentions." "Maybe not," she conceded with a small smile. "But timing does. If it hadn't stopped working when it did, you might never have come to the shop. We might never have met." "A fortunate malfunction, then," Maxwell said softly. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Lily continued. "I want to learn about the business, your business. Not to take it over or anything, just to understand that part of my heritage too." "I'd be honored to teach you," Maxwell replied. "And perhaps you could teach me something about watchmaking in return." Lily smiled, Eliza's smile. "I'd like that." As his car pulled away from the inn, Maxwell watched Thomas and Lily waving goodbye in the rearview mirror. the father who had raised her, and the daughter he was only beginning to know. His Rolex ticked steadily on his wrist, marking the seconds of a life that had been granted an unexpected new chapter. Some things, once broken, could indeed be repaired, with care, with time, with patience, not restored to what they were before, perhaps, but made whole again in a different way.